Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called 10 artists that I bloody hate, and it's part of a series of videos I've been doing this month. I think I'm coming to the end of it now. I tend to have a theme around each month. I don't know if people are aware of that. Sometimes it's jazz, sometimes it's prog, sometimes I'll be looking at like individual instrumentation, something like that. And over the past few weeks I've been looking at basically negative stuff. I have been discussing albums that are overrated, artists that are overrated, bands that I don't like very much. It's all been very, very negative. I prepared a list of the 10 artists. So as opposed to bands, this would be people, single artists, people like Michael Jackson or Elton John, although they weren't on my list. I came up with 10 I didn't like. And this morning I was about to run through that in the normal fashion as I normally would. But as I was preparing for that, my friend Richard Boxley arrived with some stuff for me that he was dropping off. And I said, would you like to participate in the video? And so we sat down to lunch, because that's why he popped round, and made ourselves a cup of tea. And I made myself some toast. He'd got some cheese, ham and pickle sandwiches, and we sat out in the garden. And we had to go through this list. Once we got out there, my battery was running out. So we really hammered through it quite quickly. Now, I don't normally do that, but it's what other YouTubers would do in this situation. They want to keep you here, so they run very fast through the list. So what you're about to see is the conversation I had with Richard Boxley, where I run through the list. It'll be pretty quick. So you'll find out the artists I don't like. There's a little bit of a chat. And then once you come back, I'm going to talk about the whole nature of this type of video. I'm going to try and talk about what it is I don't like about music as opposed to what I do like, and why I think this works so well on the internet. So without further ado, here is myself and Richard Boxley sat out in my garden going through my 10 artists that I hate, or to be more accurate, that I bloody hate. Hello viewers, I have Richard Boxley here, and he is now going to react to my least favourite artists, not bands. You did the bands, he's just done the bands, and now he's going to do the artists. And we're going to go much quicker on this one because the
battery's running out.
The battery on my phone is running out. We were outside. So the what I've got here is 10, and see what you say. So number
quick
10,
fire.
Quick fire. I've got, just tell me what your first thing that comes into your head. Like you've gone to a psychologist, and you've got a traumatic problem, and they're just going to feed you words, and you just come back with the word that comes in your head. Right. So number 10, Meatloaf.
Meatloaf. Meatloaf. Oh, I don't like him.
You don't like him?
No. But
No.
I did have the Bat Out of Hell 2
Yeah,
album.
I like the track Bat Out of Hell.
Yeah.
Bat Out of Hell's brilliant.
Yeah.
But I would do anything for love.
Too theatrical.
Yeah, horrible. David Gray.
David Gray. I had that album that was his album.
Everybody did.
I didn't have anything else.
What was it
after.
called?
I don't know, but there was a
Name
song
a
called
song on it.
Babylon.
Babylon,
That's
yeah.
the only one I know.
Babylon.
Babylon.
Yeah. Did you like it?
Yeah. At the time,
Would you like it there?
probably not.
No.
I wouldn't buy it now. It's the same time Coldplay came out with their Yellow. I had that too. I wish I hadn't.
Yes, it's always a mistake, isn't it?
Sorry.
Trying to appear normal and thinking buying a Coldplay album will do it. Well, it does not. Anyway, at number 10, 9, 8, Kanye West.
Kanye West, yeah.
I've decided I don't like him. He's off his head.
Yeah.
Well, I've said it all in the video, but the thing that I really don't like is when I go and listen to his stuff and people say these albums are a masterpiece, and it's just a sped up Shaka Khan track with him rapping really badly over the top, and I can't see what's so good about him.
He's interesting when he first came out, but not anymore.
Yeah, well, that might be something that I missed out on, being a bit too old for him. Right, the next one I got on the list is as a person, I think I'd get on with, and I like him very much. He seems like a very nice, chummy bloke.
If you met them.
Yeah, but it's Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce Springsteen?
The boss.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's a very nice fellow.
Man. Yeah, nice
gentleman.
fellow, yeah. Good life performer.
Proper gentleman, good live performer.
Yeah. Just
a bit boring though.
Boring, yeah, I know, he is boring.
Yeah.
And all his songs are rubbish. Nick Cave.
Oh, I don't know about that one.
People like him and they think
Yeah.
he's really good, and you know, but I don't like him.
Yeah, I'm just a bit take it or leave it, I think.
Yeah. If you get a guitar and you play A minor then E minor, which are the two easiest chords to play, with a tremolo sound,
That's
and then
it.
over the top go, I'm going down, down,
Yeah,
down, like that, over the top.
You've got it.
You've got it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then he gets loads of credit for that. Right, this is a surprising one. I think people would think I like this guy, but I don't. Barry White.
Barry White. Is Barry White still alive?
No, he's dead.
He is, isn't he?
I don't think he was a healthy fellow, you
no.
see, so he didn't
No,
last
no,
that
no.
long. And all those soul singers don't, for some
No.
reason, like Curtis Mayfield, Teddy Pendergrass, they all have something happen to them that's bad. Gil Scott Heron, Marvin Gaye, and he got shot, killed by his dad. But I think Barry White was just big and fat,
Yeah.
and this fatness got him.
I mean, it's a very specific thing that he did,
Yeah, I don't like it.
and I suppose if it's become sort of like a cliche now, isn't it? That sort
Yeah,
of
and people like
deep,
pretend
low-
they like it, but they only like
Yeah.
it because they actually can't listen to anything that's really soulful and funky. It's like middle of the road pap for people who want
Yeah.
to think they're soulful. And the idea that in the 70s that people procreated, and this was some sort of aid to procreation, it's just bizarre. I mean, what was he called? The Walrus of Love? I mean, who puts those two things together anyway? You
Well-
know, oh, we need a Walrus of Love.
walruses, maybe.
Well, they would have, but I'm sure that they wouldn't have Barry White because he's not actually a walrus.
No, they'd have another walrus, wouldn't
They'd have
they?
another
An actual
walrus.
walrus.
But human beings are walruses.
What
At
is-
some point have said we need to identify who the Walrus of Love would be.
Barry White.
And they thought it was Barry White. I don't even think he should be.
What other kind of odd creatures of love might you have? Maybe like the sloth of love.
The Sloth of Love. Yeah.
Who would that be?
I think that would be me.
The badger of love.
The badger of
I
love.
think you'd be the badger of love. Who would be? Somebody else would be the
They're
sloth.
cheeky chaps, though, aren't they, badgers? But let's not get on to good things. We're on bad things now. So,
Yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a
at number
tangent.
3, and I'll have to do a grimace as I say, I've got
Right.
Van Morrison.
Van Morrison. Overplayed, probably in this day and age.
Brown-eyed girl.
Yeah. It's one of the. It'll be on at every sort of wedding or disco or that kind of event, won't it? You know.
Plus, he's a tosser.
Yeah.
Do you think
Put
he's
him
a
on
tosser?
put him on the dislike list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting some good traction on these videos, so it's highly likely Van Morrison will watch this. Can
Yeah.
you just say, I don't want to be the only one saying it, do you think he's a tosser?
Tosser.
You've never met him, I've
No,
met him.
I've never met him.
But you'd still say he was, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And you're quite
Yeah.
unashamed of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see? Oh, I don't like him. Right, and number 2, really high on the list. Number 2, my second most hated artist of all time, is Cher.
Cher. Yeah. I don't care for Cher.
That might have to be the subtitle for this video. What's she ever done that's any good?
I don't know.
I mean, she married Greg Allman.
She did a aerobics video.
Did you watch that when you were younger?
No.
No.
I'm
Not
aware.
with them, not with a living in Newton
No.
John on offer.
I'm aware of
If you
it.
go
but I
into
never,
the shop to get a fitness
I never
video in the
watched
early
it.
80s, when there's no internet, you know, and you want to get fit, but you also want to have some sort of, I don't know how you describe it, some sort of, at least a
Tantalisation.
tantalisation as you get fit. And you've got a choice between Cher and Olivia Newton-John. Who are you going to go for?
Olivia Newton-John,
course you
obviously.
are.
Yeah.
Remember when she did that video and she had that really ridiculous outfit on?
I think a
It was
lot of her videos.
but it was really cut high, and
Yeah.
she was on a ship
That's it. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
loads of sailors.
Yeah. I
And
don't
they
know
were
why,
being
but
held back.
whenever I think of that, I always think of Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I would think of that as well.
I don't know why. I think.
He's probably lurking in the background.
Yeah. I
But
think
you
he
see-
used to wear a lot of leotards as well.
See, I think Cher, knowing that she didn't have the sort of attractiveness of Olivia Newton-John, once that was apparent, I think she went, well, where will the men be just gagging for it?
She had
It
to
was
up her leotard game.
Yeah, so she got that leotard, went on a ship,
Yeah.
and still nothing happened. Number 1,
Oof.
Brian Ferry.
Brian Ferry.
Yeah, can't stand him. Roxy Music are okay, but not the Brian Ferry bit.
No.
But once he goes on his own and he
Yeah.
puts that white suit on and stands there like some awful, like nightclub singer, singing in a voice that I can do even though I can't sing.
Yeah.
That voice.
I can imagine if you were to ever meet him. Have you met him?
No.
He'd be quite a difficult person to get along with.
I feel that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like a nice person at all, does he? So all in all, why is it that it's not only is he famous, but people seem to critically think he's good? You know, nobody's turned around, and he's like he makes all from Christmas, not Christmas albums, but some album jazz standards. He shouldn't go anywhere near jazz. That man,
No.
Brian Ferry. So that's my number one. What do you think?
I think it's a worthy list.
I think it's a worthy list. Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't filmed the actual video for that. I've done the video for the other one, but I haven't filmed the video for this. So I might have given the game away with some of the things I'm going to say. I'm going to have to say different stuff now.
Well, you will if you post this video first.
I could put this up first and say it, so it's got a different structure to the other one where you're going to be on the end. You're advertised on the other one as a coda.
A coda?
Yeah, but what I've done is I've got like these stormy clouds appear.
Yeah.
Right, and out of the clouds appears the musical theory sign for a coda.
Right.
You see, that's the one that looks like a target.
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it? And it sort of comes out the clouds, but it doesn't say anything, you see. And if people have watched that, what the hell was that? Well, if they're proper viewers and they've stayed to the end of this one, now you know that was a coda. And what's a coda? Because Richard's got very good music theory knowledge, probably better than mine. What is a coda?
It's an extra bit at the end.
It's an extra bit at the end. And that's what you are, an extra bit at the end.
An extra bit at the end.
Have you finished your dinner?
I have.
You drunk your tea?
Yes.
We're all done, aren't we?
I believe so.
Right, brilliant. Bye-bye, everybody. So I hope that has satisfied your, what would it be? Maybe nosiness. Maybe you want to see whether we have the same sort of hate so we can bond. Or maybe I get on your nerves and you want to have more of me annoying you by liking bands that you don't like. Although I can't see anybody who watches this channel will like any of the bands. Maybe Dire Straits, Marillion, nailed it. Dire Straits and Marillion could be liked by people. Who else did I discuss? Might be a few Simply Red fans, but they won't admit it. So, what is it that I don't like about music? Well, I think what I do like about it is I like stuff that's exciting. I think that was a thing about music that drew me to it. When I discovered heavy metal, what it was for me, it was exciting, and it was also slightly dangerous in that it had a sort of an aggressive sound, and it was like an alternative to what normal people liked. And I think that was the big thing with me about music. I felt at a certain age that I wasn't the same as everybody else in my school. I didn't like the same films, didn't like the same music, didn't think the same way. I was what Colin Wilson would call an outsider. When I was probably about 18, 19, I actually discovered the book The Outsider by Colin Wilson, and I read it. Now, many people have reported having a nervous breakdown after reading that book. I didn't. I actually find it very inspiring and made a lot of sense. And a lot of the stuff he talked about in that book laid the groundworks for my interests, sort of philosophically, aesthetically. It was this book that just lit my brain up, this idea of being an outsider, right? And there was a sort of rebelliousness about being an outsider, which I think rock music had grasped. Now, this outsiderness, this true outsiderness, is where you're outside the law, you're outside the normal moral spheres of normal people. One of the people he talked about in that book was Aleister Crowley, and I became aware that, you know, people like Jimmy Page are into Aleister Crowley, also people like Graham Bond. There was an interest in this sort of dark spiritualism, and I was into heavy metal, so I was into you know, Black Sabbath, and around that time, you know, Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz album came out, and there was this track, Mr. Crowley. That is what initially brought me to music. It was the darkness. And within the darkness, I also found the light, which I found in bands like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, or later on John Coltrane. There was darkness and light. The artist I ended up really loving would be Miles Davis, and Miles Davis is of the night. He's the Prince of Darkness. But within his band, he had John McLaughlin, and he was of the light. I was also a huge fan of Frank Zappa. He was of the darkness. There were these two opposing things working against each other. those bands, and they're few and far between, that explored the light, I think I found extremely fascinating. And that aesthetic has always been in there in what I like. And it's sort of like a spirituality, but it's not quite like a spirituality. It's an aesthetic spirituality. I find I like that, but I also like music that explores the darkness. Now, what I think with all the bands on the list that I chose, none of that is in there. It's almost like it's the music of the normal people. It's the music of the exoteric. It's the music that represents how the great normal, like sort of, how would you describe it? That there's a evidence of people just thinking a certain way because they've been trained to think a certain way. I have always been a natural contrarian, and that has always got me into trouble. On YouTube, being a contrarian is great. It works really well. Everybody loves a contrarian on YouTube, but in real life, they don't like it at all. And this has caused me trouble throughout my life. I've always taken the opposite side, and I've always loved music that represents that. And so, being a child of the 1980s, when all my friends were listening to Dire Straits or Duran Duran or The Cure or The Smiths, that was the one music I wouldn't listen to. And it was quite apparent to me that popular music was something that was just being fed to young people, and it differed. And I was fascinated going back to other bands, knowing that they were once popular. When I discovered bands like Black Sabbath and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, they seemed to occupy this world, which was huge. These were huge bands, but the normal people didn't know about them. The normal people had no idea about them. And the world, that rock music world that I became attracted to, the normal people almost didn't know it was there. I became a rocker. I grew my hair long, you know, I got a leather jacket, and I put my denim jacket over the top with the arms cut off, and I put all the patches on the back. I had all the studded wristbands, I had the whole works, you know. And as I got older, I would frequent metal venues and metal clubs, and you'd go into a city and you'd feel the threat of being surrounded by all these normal people, violent, non-thinking types. And eventually you get into the heavy metal club, and you know most of the people outside would hate to have been in there, and they would have seen it as quite a dark and frightening place. But once I was in there, I felt like I was surrounded by nice people, regular people, and they were nice because they didn't judge you. They weren't judging you how trendy you were or anything like that. All they were interested was the rock. That was all they were interested in. And I think, though I was a musician and I was very interested in sort of the virtuose aspects of music, you know, I was trying to learn my instrument. So I wanted to listen to players who were good, and my idea of good was developing and changing. I was discovering jazz and understanding, you know, how extremely difficult it is to play that music. And so, but it was always coloured by this otherness. So, for example, in the 80s, when the sort of GRP Fusat came back, and all my friends who were musicians were listening to the likes of John Patitucci, Chick Corea's Electric Band, Dave Grusin, Lee Ritner, the whole host of those, I reacted against those. I didn't like it at all. It was fantastically played, but it was incredibly conservative, and like it was as though they were trying to please that normal person audience, and then the one that might be a little bit interested in putting something on instrumental at their dinner party. That was what they seemed to be going. And I, in the 80s, started to search elsewhere. I discovered free jazz, and free jazz for me, although some of the albums were hard for me to listen to, and I would listen to them and not, you know, I didn't get it in terms of the way I would go and sit and listen to like a Herbie Hancock album. Some of them are extreme. I remember searching out Machine Gun by Peter Brotzmann, and when I owned that and had it in my hand, I felt like I had something that was more than the sound of it. Now, the CD copy I got was it off on the FMP label, CMP label, and I had to order it on import. It cost a whole ton of money. It came in this little cheap thing, and when I put it on, there was this distorted, unmastered noise that just came out. I felt very proud the other day, and now that I've been acquainted with Shane Embry from Napalm Death, and we've been doing a little bit together, I said to him, have you ever heard Machine Gun, knowing that this is the most darkest, heavy thing ever? And I felt honoured to be able to play this to one of the members, founding members, really, of Napalm Death. And I put it on, I went onto YouTube, and what I was met with was this sort of mastered, very beautiful sounding recording. They've gone in and done the job, and it just wasn't the same. I like that noisy sound. It's like Tony Williams' Lifetime, the first album. Do you really want it all nice and pristine, or do you want it all distorted and wrong? So I've been always drawn to that, and I think that's something that I value more than compositional ability or technical ability. And so the thing that hovers over me in terms of what I like or don't like is the shadow of punk. I'm a little bit too young for punk, but punk would have been a forming movement for me. In 1977, I was 9 years old. And my interest in music started in that year, 1977, and I moved through. When punk emerged in the UK here, my dad, who was a very astute music fan, and he'd been a drummer as well. He had a really good, strong ear for music, and he was able to turn me on to people that I didn't necessarily, I wouldn't have expected he liked, but he suggested I listen to Jimi Hendrix, and he suggested I listen to King Crimson. How he knew about these bands, I don't know. But when punk came out, my dad absolutely hated it, and at that point, he put a boycott on Top of the Pops. He put a boycott on any music program. And so there was a gap when I wasn't allowed to listen to popular music, around about the ages of 9, 10, 11. When we started to be allowed to listen to it again, we were then in the back end of punk. And the back end of punk had these sort of new wave bands. And for me, it was those bands that I got really excited about. And those would be things like Ian Dury and the Blockheads, Squeeze. I love Squeeze. Bits of XTC I loved. I loved The Police. I loved 10-Pole Tudor. That was a fantastic song, which was definitely a sort of post-punk song. You know, you had bands like The Skids. You had a whole, Undertones, whole hot bunch of stuff. And that's my early introduction to music. I was a big fan of Two Tone. I loved Badness and The Specials and Selector and Bad Manners. Loved Bad Manners. And I loved the new wave of British heavy metal. So I come in at the new wave of British heavy metal. I never knew anything about Led Zeppelins or Deep Purples. What I liked was the crossover between sort of heavy rock of the early 70s and punk of the mid to late 70s. And that had its influence on the new wave of British heavy metal. And that had a very special quality. Although I was a huge fan of The Police, and although I was a huge fan of Madness and Selector, these are the very first bands I sort of bought. The new wave of British heavy metal bands, they had another aspect to it. They had this otherness about them. And I think that was because once I discovered them, I suddenly realised that there was nobody in my school that liked these bands, except for about 4 other people, and you could spot them a mile off. I can remember I used to walk to school, and there was a guy that was in the 6th form. I would have been about 13, 14. He would have been about 18. And this great big tall lumbering bloke walked along with his sort of black leather motorcycle jacket on. And he had long hair, long, straight, shiny black hair. He had sort of slight flared trousers, cowboy boots on, and he stomped his way to school. And I was behind him going, he likes what I like, I can tell. And I was too scared to go up and talk to him. And I almost like hero worshipped this bloke. I thought he looked so cool, and I wanted to look like that, And my mum and dad wouldn't let me grow my hair long. I did attempt to grow my hair long, and my dad actually held me down and cut my hair. He held me down on the floor and cut my hair because it had grown into this great big afro ball. My dad was always very suspicious of the countercultural aspects of rock music, and he would keep an eye on it. I was a huge fan of Motorhead, and I made a shrine to Motorhead in my bedroom. I actually did a pencil drawing of the cover of Ace of Spades, which was huge. It was about 4 or 5 foot tall. It took me hours, probably days to do this drawing. And once I'd done it, I put it up on the wall. And then I got these chains, and I created this sort of chain work thing that went around it with all these chains of metal. And then I had a table in front of it, and on there I put my Motorhead singles and all my memorabilia. And I can remember my dad came into the room one day, and he saw the shrine of Motorhead. And that drawing, which I'd taken ages to do, he just grabbed it and screwed it and ripped it down. Now, it sounds like this was a horrendous childhood. It wasn't. This was just what everybody went through, of my age group. It was a different time. I love my dad to bits. He was a very astute musician. And so, even if he didn't like Motorhead, if I was listening to them, he would come in and he would point out what he thought was good about them. And the rock bands that I was listening to, I noticed that he would have more respect for certain bands. And around about 1980, I'd say 81 perhaps, I picked up an album called Deep Purple Live in Concert, which was a new issue of some of the recordings that Deep Purple had done in 1970 and 1972 for BBC in concert on Radio 1. The 1970 stuff, Deep Purple were really exploratory, somewhere between a sort of psychedelic rock band, a progressive rock band, and almost like a jazz fusion band in places. And on this album, they did versions of Mandrake Roots, they did versions of Space Trucking, which were almost like a side long, 20 minutes of just this jamming. I found this fascinating, but when I put this on, my dad would come in as well and say, this is really, really good stuff. And so I became aware that within this sort of countercultural rock music, and Richie Blackmore had been a big part of this, because another memory I have was when I got into heavy rock, new wave British heavy metal, BBC Two in the UK that year showed some concert footage of the Monsters of Rock Festival at Castle Donington. It was the inaugural Monsters of Rock Festival. This was on the TV, and I bought the albums. Anyone remember that live album that came out? That was like a Bible, that was, to me. There were certain albums, I think the two Axe Attack ones, Metal for Mothers, and that one, and on there you got Rainbow. I believe you'd got, was Saxon on there? Could have been. But it had Riot, April Rhine, Touch, Rainbow. Who else was on there? I'm sure you're shouting at me now. But when Rainbow were on the TV, I remember Richie Blackmore came out and he looked satanic. He'd got that sort of a hat thing on that made him look like a Puritan, but he was dressed in black and he sculpted around the stage in quite a dangerous manner. And towards the end of the concert, he started smashing his guitar into his amp, which when I was 12 years old, I'd never seen anything like this. And suddenly the amp burst into flames and it was roaring on. And I thought, my God, I've never seen anything like this. B.A. Robinson never does anything like this. Barbara Dixon never does anything like this. All this stuff that was on the sort of mainstream charts. And so Richie Blackmore they had a quality about them. There was a darkness to it. And I think that is the common denominator. So when you see this list of bands I hate, what it is that they just do not have that at all. There is no danger, there is no rough edge, there is no pointing to anything that could be troublesome. It is designed totally to put you asleep. It is designed to bathe you in a warm bath of patheticness. Patheticness and patheticness. That's what you get from these bands. It's designed to shut you up. It's designed to keep you happy. It's designed for you to go, oh, there's so much trouble in the world. I don't really want to know about that. I just want to put my Lighthouse Family album on and hear all these nice things. I don't want to be troubled with all these things, And at that time, I would go into the living room and my mum and dad would be sat there watching, I don't know, Last of the Summer Wine or some program like this. It's Sunday evening television always had the sort of dramatic equivalent of the Lighthouse Family or Simply Red. You'd have things like Heartbeats, or you'd have things like Midsummer Murders. All these things that were so just like it. It was like heroin for the middle classes, to keep them calm, to calm them down before they had to go back into the slog on Monday morning, back to the office and fight their way to that, as they smashed their head against that till they retired and they finally could pull their pension, just to die a few years later of a heart attack caused by all the stress, which they knowingly were aware they were going through the whole time they were doing that. And I really didn't want that. Little did I know that I would be cursing myself to a life of near poverty. But I became very aware that I didn't want that route into life. I can remember as a very young kid, sometimes my mum and dad let me stay up to watch Monty Python. And Monty Python had lots of troublesome things in there, I noticed. You know, every now and then you might get a sort of naked lady, or you might get reference to sort of sex in there, you know, nudge, wink, wink, you know, all that bits. And so it was troublesome. And I could tell when those bits came on, my parents would bristle and think, oh, maybe we should have sent the kids to bed. But I can remember the whole family laughing wholeheartedly as John Cleese left his house wearing a suit and a bowler hat, carrying a little black briefcase and his umbrella. And as he walked out the house, of course, he started to do all that funny walk, and it was incredible as he walked down the road. And it was just so strange. Oh, they're so weird, they're so wacky. Why is Monty Python doing it? It's funny, but why would he do it? And I can remember he came out of the house, walked down the road, and as he crossed the road, in the background, and this must have taken Monty Python ages to set up, going into some little terrace house was a huge queue of people, all blokes wearing brown raincoats and little cloth caps. That was the working class. That was the working class in another queue going to another place. But John Cleese didn't represent that. He represented the middle classes. And he was going to do this job. He was off to do this job. And this job meant that he would go to some government department and do something absolutely pointless, and that would be to take something like a silly walk, which is an expression of just surreal stupidity. You know, it's what makes the world go round. And they would try and nail this in a very English, authoritarian, civil servant type of way. And then certain walks would be approved, or they would have to apply for government grants, and basically kill what that was about. And the comedy was not just in the silly walk, it was the juxtaposition of those two things. And I remember watching it, being very aware that this wasn't just surreal humour. This was a representation of what's the middle classes, which I was one of those. No, I wasn't working class, I was middle class. What our future would be. That we were supposed to go to school, work hard, get our exams, go get a degree, come out, and then find some company where we could sit in an office until we were close to death. And that was what our future was. And you didn't have to choose that. The working classes would have exactly the same thing, but they were looking even worse at the factory that the people in the offices were perhaps overseeing, and their life would be sat on a conveyor belt doing the same thing. That they would literally sell the only thing they had, which was the seconds and minutes and hours of their own life. What else could they do? I didn't want it. And I looked to these rock bands, and these rock bands seemed to be, they seem to exist in their own world. I was very aware that most people couldn't enter that world. But if you had the skills, you could. If you had the rock and roll skills, you could. So you had to put your head down and work. And I did. By the time I got into the sixth form, I wouldn't go to school. I'd get in trouble because I would skive off. Once I was not required by my parents to put on my school uniform and go, which in the UK at that time was when you were 16, so you could leave schools, go. No one could really tell you what to do at that point. Now they've changed that law, and now everyone has to stay at school to 18. But once you got to 16, you do what you want. So the school couldn't really do anything. So I would wake up in the morning with the choice of going to school to do my A-levels or going into my drum room to practice. And of course, I would most of the time go into my drum room to practice. I would have my pajamas on, I would sit down, and in the morning I would do a 3-hour practice routine where I'd run through all sorts of quite difficult, almost like just training exercises, repetitive exercises. Then I would have a break and I'd have something to eat, and I'd go back up and I would play. Once, my mum and dad came home from work, I would stop doing that, and then I would pull out my guitar and start listening to records, and I would listen to a lot of records whilst trying to pick up anything I could from those records. I learnt to play guitar by basically putting Miles Davis albums on, and Miles used to solo in a beautiful way where you would play this phrase and then there would be a gap. You go, big gap, It was like that sort of that answer thing, and so I could sort of pick up the phrases. So not only was I learnt the scales of the notes that fitted, I was learning Miles Davis's phrases, and that would be my day. 6 hours of drum practice and 4 hours of guitar practice. Loads of listening to music. It was all based around listening to music. The whole day was. I needed lots of music. I needed the next answer for me was always in the next album, and I was always searching for something, you know, and that meant going out to like second-hand shops, junk shops, because all the music that I was interested in, I was reading about in the books I was getting from the library, it was all deleted. I'd go out to a local record shop and they didn't have it there, so I'd say, oh, can you order for me? And they'd look it up and go, say, I'm sorry, that's deleted. And then I'd be in some junk shop, and for like £1.50 I would find this album, and eventually, after much searching, I found a copy of Birds of Fire by the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and that was the first album I'd heard where I felt I'd actually found what I was looking for. And the Mahavishnu Orchestra seemed to be a conjunction of all these things. It was virtuoso, it was an expression of angst, it was an expression of danger, but it was also about the light. It had the heavy metal fury. It was extremely obscure and yet well known. When people talked about it, they talked about it in hushed tones. It had this aura about it, which was as exciting for me as the fact that the musicians were very good. I felt like I'd found what I was looking for, and that meant from that point on, I was then exploring different avenues. I stopped looking for this one thing, and I sort of got interested in like just piano music, or I got interested in say just classical music for a little bit, and then I got interested in, say, like thrash metal, and I was listening to Anthrax, and I was exploring and sampling. And at that point, I had the belief that by having all these multiple influences and pulling those in, that by squeezing those together naturally in my own system, that new music would come out. And I was very interested in trying to make new music. This kept me away from all the sort of normal choices that my fellow musicians were trying to make at that time. So not only was I an outsider to the normal person because I was a musician, but within the group of musicians I was an outsider because they were all trying to get in a band and write songs, and they were trying to like get a record deal. And every now and then I'd get asked to join some band. I'd have no interest in this aspect. I just wanted to play the drums, and I'd get frustrated and go. But I learned about how that thing worked. I was lucky enough that I had developed enough chops that I could actually go out and make some money. So the next thing I found myself was playing in covers bands, in cabaret bands, going around working men's clubs, you know, playing the worst middle of the road stuff you could ever play. And I think it developed a deeper hatred of that. And I saw how you had to, you know, please the audience. There you are with your drum kit, playing your drums in front of an audience, and they come up and say the most stupid things to you after it. And they would think you were into this music because you were playing it. You know, you'd be sat there playing The Wind Beneath My Wings, you know, waiting, you know, as a something to break up the bingo in some working man's club, and people would think this was wonderful and you must love it. And I had a disdain for them, and I had a disdain for that type of music. And I thought, why do they like it? What do they like about this? Because I couldn't understand it. And what they liked about it is that it was like a tonic to the real troubles of life. And I'm sure all the bands on those lists that I've gone through, that I've criticised and poked fun at in quite an elitist, snobbish way, possibly for the great normal, you know, great mass of normal people out there, that's a break. They don't want to be reminded of the darkness that lurks, because they don't think about it, but they're in it and they know it's there, but they just want respite from it. They want the Lighthouse Family. That's what they want. They want Dire Straits. They just want something easy listening. Could be anything really. And I hope, in amongst all this silliness I've been doing this month, which is very entertaining, and I do enjoy the comedy of it, that the last video I think I've done in this series, I have tricked you into thinking you're going to get something, and he did get it, but me and Richard did it quickly. and we got it out of the way, and you have been met with this video where I've given my true thoughts on this. And when I get to this point, talking it through like this, I realise that it is just my worldview based upon my experience of the world, and we're all different. And now I'm at this age, rather than sort of the rebellious teen that wanted no part of that normal world that I was terrified of. Right now I'm 56 years old, and I've traversed my way through it, and I'm glad I had that music, and I'm glad I had that worldview, because I did okay. I've got my house, and I've got my kids, and I've got my family. I've managed to survive up till this point without really ever doing a proper job. Music has served me well. Music has looked after me. Music has been the thing that had its hand on my shoulder the whole time, saying, it's all right, Andy, we'll see you through. I have to be honest. And just when I thought I was in the worst trouble ever, my love of music and I suppose my knowledge as well to some extent, but I think more than anything else, just my absolute love of it has bore fruit here on my YouTube. So why do I morally think it's all right to bash these artists, which I've actually now, I think, tried to place much more accurately than I did in the original? So why is that good to do? And I'm going to tell you why, and then I'm done, I think, on this video. Music is where art is where we negotiate what is beautiful. I've said that a million times. Music deals with the emotional aspects of our existence more than the sort of story aspects. And those are the two aesthetic ways of viewing the world. The world can be a story and have meanings, and you can get the meanings from stories and understand the world in a different way. But music deals far more with just your raw feeling and emotion, and it can place you in a certain place. It can take you back to a memory. It can excite you, it can anger you. And so I think we all represent something, don't we, in the world? We all represent something, and there must be a meaning for that. Those people who lean to the left, they lean to the left because their personality leans to the left. They've got a certain personality. And the psychology has been done on this. People who are left-wing, tend to be more empathetic. And I suppose people who lean to the right tend to be more rational. The lefties will hate that because they want to be seen as rational. And I've simplified that greatly. But I think the big crisis we've got at the moment in our culture is the fact that all these people with all these different views of the world, they're there because you all chip in. Everyone chips in, and we have a debate. And in Western liberal capitalist democratic societies, we should have a method where we can all be friends, turn up. And in the old days in the UK, you'd have the House of Commons, and all those guys would turn up and they go into their club and they get their cigars out and they all chat to each other. And the Labour guys would be friends with the Conservative guys, and they'd have a chat about things. And so and so's been doing. Oh yes, I didn't know that. Well, his son's in a very terrible way. All that stuff would be going on, and then they go in and debate with each other. And even left or right, they'd arrive there, as they do now, because they were part of the elite. They'd fluke their way into the sort of small group of people that tell the rest of us what to do. And they go there and negotiate it. But they'd have their principles, and they'd have their viewpoints, and they would be in opposition. And they would argue it through. And even though they were against each other, I feel in the old days there was more of some sort of understanding that compromise had to be reached. And we have lost that at the moment. And I think the reason we've lost that is because we have moved away from our Western liberal, democratic, capitalist ideals. We've moved away from those, and we've got a little bit stained by sort of almost like religious dogma that has crept into our worldview. And it hasn't crept in through sort of the fundamentalist Christians, although it's there now over in America on the right. It's crept in through identity politics, which is without doubt dogmatic and full of all sorts of contradictions and stuff that doesn't make sense if you actually think about it in a logical way. And because of that, and because that makes them people hold on to that if you believe you're morally right, absolute, which always comes from a religious point of view, when someone disagrees with you, they're just totally wrong. and they better change their mind. If they don't change their mind, something needs to be done about it. And because of that, that's fractured. And these things that were held at bay are no longer held at bay because you have social networking. So people could have their opinions and they could stay in their bubble, and then they could talk to each other. And when somebody comes out in from another bubble into their bubble, they will be hounded out. You know, like a sort of hunter-gatherer community would have hounded out anybody that was an outsider. They would have been a true outsider if they didn't conform to the communitarian aspects of the group they are in. As soon as they started doing anything weird, everyone would just snarl at them and they would like castigate them, and they would be out of the group and they would wander around on their own till they got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or fell off a cliff or starved to death. Or got like smashed over the head by the other competing communitarian group over the mountain, and they had to have their brains eaten by those people. Probably something like that. It's the second time I've talked about brains being eaten on this channel. It's all got very dark. But you see, that's what you're dealing with here. I am a very dark person, right? And I have a dark sense of humour. And I've lost my thread now. Why the hell was I talking about that? Yeah, so if you do have a different point of view like me, if you are a contrarian, you better keep your mouth shut, because you know that there's the equivalent of that now. You can be socially ostracized. Most artistic types who experience anxiety, the anxiety is actually coming from the fact that they know that if they were their normal selves, they might get ostracized. They are terrified of the group turning around and snarling at them until they end up on the streets with no friends at all, just because they were a bloody weirdo. Well, I think music is the safe place where we can look at that. Music is the safe place. Whereas if I turn around and I say, you know, what do you think of, and I name a band, and my friend Richard just bursts out laughing, that laugh represents something, there's a bond there between me and him, because it points to the fact that we are not part of that without having to say that. It's like a code. It's a code of saying, yeah, I am one of the weirdos. The guy that exemplified this more than anybody else in my history was Frank Zappa. You know, Frank Zappa wasn't a hippie. He was a freak. He was the type of person, if you moved in next door, then your lawn would die, as he famously said. He was freaks and weirdo. And on the very first album, Freak Out, there's an a cappella called It Can't Happen Here. It can't happen here, it can't, you know, that thing. And this was just a bunch of really weird people in a recording studio in 1966 just stating their claim on this thing. And that at that point, it was encapsulated in music. You know, I think that's what I like about music. A music that doesn't do that, and it has to exist. The most, you know, you're not going to have a music industry and not have music for all the normal people. And now I'm older, I have a lot more time for those normal people. I thought they were just stupid, but they weren't stupid. What they were was pragmatic. They're a pragmatic bunch, and they're just trying to get through life. That's all they're trying to do. And everyone's forgotten about them, haven't they? Powers that be have just forgotten about them. Oh, I went off into my own thoughts then. So this video may not have been what you expected, but it is what it is. And hopefully, when you go back to all these videos where I am stating albums that are overrated or bands that I don't like, and you see the silly humour in there, that humour is dealing with a certain thing, and it's dealing with a certain aspect of all of us, hopefully, that are watching it. And what it is a bunch of middle-aged outsiders. And we've lived our life, we're here, and we look back on it and went, God, I got through it, but I never felt like I fitted in. And I'm sure that's much more common than the snobby little git that I was at 18 thought, where I thought I was something special for not being that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it delivered what you wanted. If it didn't, then you need to just watch the fair weather videos I make, you know, the popularist ones, not come here. Once I get philosophical, you need to go somewhere else, because of course you're one of them. But if you're one of us and you enjoyed this little conversation I had, put a like on it and subscribe, because if this video was to go viral, for example, because they won't know, Andy's really discussed something interesting there. He's really cottoned onto something. I don't think anyone else has said that about it. And I feel he's right. If you like it and keep pushing it, I would love, you know, in the sort of autumn years of my life, to be able to have this YouTube and come and talk about this stuff, because I feel that I am it, I embody it, I've suffered with it, but I'm old enough to be able to hold it in my hand and see it objectively. I don't see myself as some psychologist or guru or doctor or anybody that knows anything than anybody else, because I can't stick that. I am as stupid and idiotic as you. We're all in it together. I can remember, and I'll finish with this, when I met my wife, she was really into John Lydon and the Sex Pistols. She'd had a terrible experience through her teenage years, really traumatic and damaging. And the one person that sort of got her through that was John Lydon and the Sex Pistols. Now, I was a big fan of John Lydon because of the Public Image Limited album, but she was a big fan of the Sex Pistols, which I was indifferent to, I suppose. And in 2008, we found out that they were getting back together and they were playing up in Birmingham, so we bought tickets to it. And I went along, you know, to accompany my wife and support her in seeing one of her favourite bands. And when we got in there, Sex Pistols walk onto the stage and they start to play. And I'm hit with this tight, visceral energy of this band. This is a rock band. It reminded me back in 1980 when I was listening to Angel Witch, or I was listening to Iron Maiden or the early Def Leppard. They rocked. The drums were tight, the guitars were meaty and heavy, they had big thick power chords, and it was even better than heavy metal because John Lydon didn't try and sing over the top of it like an opera singer. He growled and shouted at the audience, and I felt my hair stand on end. I suddenly got what this was about. I didn't get it, what it was about when my dad stopped me from listening to it back in 1977. And I'd taken all this time. I was 40 years old, and there I was hearing it, and my hair was standing on end. Punk had finally got to me at the age of 40. And it finished, and John Lydon came to the front of the stage, and he said hello to everybody. And then he said the line that I will never forget. He said, "Just remember, you lot, I'm one of you." And at that point, I burst out crying.